All right. Well, yesterday there was a 16 board members of the American Academy of Pediatrics, also simply known as AAP. They met yesterday and reaffirmed that group's 2018 guidance on so-called gender-affirming care for minors. But it also commissioned an external review of trans-related procedures, recognizing that, quote, additional details would be helpful. So according to AAP Chairman and CEO Mark Del Monte, the question is all coming up. What are these reviews that they think is going to be helpful? Where's it going to take us? Will it take us down a path similar to some European nations who are now backtracking on some of the positions that they previously held on trans procedures for minors? Or is this going to take them down a path of doubling down on their position? Well, join me now to discuss this is Dr. Jennifer Bauwens. She's the Director of Family Studies here at Family Research Council. Dr. Bauwens, thank you for joining me. Always great to see you.
It's good to be back with you, Jody.
Thank you. All right, so let's, I guess probably one of the first questions most people would have is, let's look at the European countries. They've looked at all the medical research on these so-called gender-affirming care procedures for minors, and they've reversed course. What are we looking at now? Is that what the AAP is looking at, do you think, or what's really underneath going on?
Yeah, I think that they're succumbing to a bit of pressure. We certainly are seeing a number of lawsuits that are coming out from brave young men and women who are saying that how much damage this has done to their being, not just their bodies, but their psychological and spiritual selves. And so AAP affirmed that, yes, we still believe that this is the path forward, but we're willing to do this review. Well, I think just the fact, regardless of their motivation, I think we can celebrate one point here, which is the fact that they're doing the review is an admission that the science indeed is not settled, as our president and our HHS secretary and assistant secretary have proclaimed about this practice. But there's nothing settled about this practice. And as we're seeing the European countries come out and say, this is not a helpful practice, now our own nation is having to come to grips with this. So yes, I am very cautious about what the results of this review will be, because I know firsthand the political nature of science. But at the same time, I do want to celebrate that they are admitting that it's not settled, and that they need to go back and look at this, what the science is actually saying.
Well, that's a good point, that just the fact that they're even considering such a study does underscore the fact that the science is still out there, which we all know what the science is. Look, you can't make a boy a girl. You can't make a girl a boy. That it is really relatively simple in that regard. And yet I understand we've got to go through all the procedures, all the studies. But is it a bit unusual, given this scenario, that the AAP would continue to support the so-called gender-affirming care before this review has concluded?
Yeah, it is unusual. If you see a red flag, you should stop.
Right.
But actually, even going further back, I mean, it is this admission should put a halt. But even way before all of this ever started, we should have been really cautious. Even if you don't have the same worldview that we have about God's creation, regardless, the science itself should tell you that we are not in a place to move forward with the kinds of interventions that are at this level of invasion of a child's body. There's so many unanswered questions in the research, not to mention the research methods themselves. They're really poor methods. They're the kinds of methods that you would see at the very beginning of a research agenda. So that's why I say, way before this practice where we're at right now, requesting a review, we should have way back when said, you know what, we don't have enough information We have a lot of unanswered questions, basic questions that other diagnoses that are well researched but still have questions. There's way more information with those practices, and this is the most invasive practice. So that's what I think we need to keep hammering at, is that this has the least amount of evidence for the most invasive type of interventions, with not a lot of knowledge about what are, not just to mention the physical ramifications, but we don't understand the psychological ramifications of stopping puberty, of introducing social transition, introducing these hormones. There are psychological implications as well, and those haven't even been discussed.
Well, let me throw this out to you, because this is kind of where I see this going. I'd like to get your take on it. The Wall Street Journal, I imagine you probably saw, but they recently reported that AAP, the CEO there, said that this whole review reflected the fact that they are very concerned about restrictions that they are seeing take place across the country, obviously referring to red states and the many states that are putting restrictions on some of this. So it appears to me that what they're doing, they're going to have this little study, and they're going to say, okay, we studied this, but our study says it's all safe, it's good for us to proceed. But so they're going to try to give the appearance of doing authentic study and following the science, but all at the same time, they're trying to attack states that are trying to put it to an end. And so at the end of the day, I just see this as just nothing but another political ploy. Am I barking up the right tree or no?
No, I think you're absolutely barking up the right tree. And just the framing of some of these articles, the way they talk about supporters of children, of healthy practices, they call us Christian, right wing, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, well, if they never characterize the other side as atheist, humanist, or et cetera, So even in the framing of a lot of these arguments, it should bring questions to mind, because we're purely talking about some of the science that has been used to prop up these practices. And if the review comes back and it looks very different than the other countries, then we should be raising more red flags and asking for greater transparency of the reviewers themselves, of the data that they're using to analyze, and not to mention, again, like I said before, what are the questions that haven't been asked? Why isn't anyone curious about this new cohort of young women who are identifying as transgender, when that has not been for the historical norm? And there are so many research questions we could spend a whole segment on that are missing from this area of study that should be answered before one child is even remotely put on any kind of puberty blocker, cross-sex hormone, and definitely not a surgery.
Awesome information, Dr. Jennifer Bauwens. Thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch and for all your incredible work. We're extremely grateful.
Thank you, Jody.